Hi everyone, welcome to this next video. So in this one, what we're going to be talking about is changing the subject. So when a question asks you to rearrange an equation, we're going to look at really simple, basic couple of examples here to start with, and then we're going to look at more complex ones. So some of this would be on foundation, and the ones that we've got here at the bottom would probably be more towards the higher level, but not necessarily an explicit example. It'd be more involved in just rearranging in general as part of a bigger question. So the thing about this skill is that it might just be that you have a question as simple as that or as simple as that, where it asks you to change the subject, which would be the case more on foundation. However, this skill is very much involved in a lot of other questions where you have to rearrange, work backwards and solve problems. So let's jump in. Let's have a little look at what we've got. So it says make x the subject in, and it's got the equation there. So the first thing I'd say to you is underline what it is you're trying to make the subject. So in this case, I'm trying to make x the subject here. Now there's lots of different methods to rearranging, and it's similar to solving equations. The method I like to use is one where you pick it up and move it over the other side. So what you need to understand here is that that x is the thing I'm trying to get on its own, and that 3 is multiplied by x. So it's 3 times x, which means it's stuck to it at the moment. So what you need to do is move the thing that is easier to move, and this plus 9y is the easiest thing to move. So you pick that up, take it over the other side. Now, as soon as you move something over this equal sign, if you want to think about it like a wall, it changes signs. But at the moment, it's a plus 9y. So when I move it over, it becomes a minus 9y. So what that means is I've got 3x, which hasn't moved. The 15b hasn't moved. And now the 9y becomes minus 9y. Always think to yourself here now, can I put these things together? Well, no, I can't, because that's a b and that's a y, so they can't go together. Underline again the bit that you're trying to get on its own. I'm trying to get that x on its own, so the next thing I now need to move is this 3. And when I move this 3 over the equal sign, it changes. Now, what I just said up there was that this was 3 times x, so when you move it over, it becomes a divide by 3. So what that means is the x now stays where it is. 15b minus 9y stays where it is. And the divide by 3 can be written underneath. Now, sometimes you will get equations where this can be actually divided. So then this is the case where I can actually divide this. So if I think about it, if I'm doing 15b divided by 3, 15 does divide by 3, and 9y does divide by 3. So you could put your answer as x is equal to, well, 15 divided by 3 is 5, so that becomes 5b, and 9y divided by 3 is just 3. So I could leave my answer now as x equals 5b minus 3y. So go through your steps and your processes, underline the thing it is that you're trying to make the subject, and move everything else that's not attached to it first, and then think about that final step. When you are moving that thing that is attached to the x, can you actually divide it? Another thing to remember is you must always write x equals. So where x is a subject, you have to write x equals and then what you've got. If you don't actually write x equals, you may lose the mark in the exam. So what you could do is you could pause the video here, have a go at the next one, slightly harder, because what we're trying to do now is make q the subject. So you could think about what to do here. Or you could carry on and watch me go through it, this example here. Okay, so I'm going to take q is what I'm trying to get on its own. Now, when you've got a fraction involved on this left-hand side like this, what you need to do is remove the denominator of the fraction first of all. And the way to do that is I'm going to circle it and take it over. Now, at the moment, just think to yourself, that line means divide. So I'm saying divided by q. Well, if it's a divide by q and I move it over, it's going to become a times by q. Okay, so what I then end up having is 5x plus 7 hasn't moved. So I'm just going to write it over here. 5x plus 7 hasn't moved is equal to b, and then that's times by q, and the q has moved, so it becomes bq. So that means b times q. Now, go back to think, what am I trying to make the subject? Q, so I'm trying to get this on its own. So now, that b would be the thing that then goes over this way. So you're almost swapping these two over now. And again, think to yourself, bq means b times q. So when you move the b over, it becomes a divide by b. So your answer would be 5x plus 7 divided by b equals q. And again, make sure you write the letter out. Okay, so a bit of a shortcut there is you could effectively just swap these two over, but actually what I'm doing is multiplying it by q first of all and then dividing by b. Now let's look at this question again, but this time what if it asked you to make x a subject? So I'm just going to rub that out, and let's change the question ever so slightly. So if it said make x the subject, so you could pause the video, have a go at it yourself if you want to. I'm just going to move this equation just to the side here, and now this is the part I'm trying to make it the subject. So my first step is still going to be the same. I'm going to take this q and I'm going to take it over there. So it becomes 5x plus 7 is equal to b, and again the q's gone over, so b times q, because on this side here that q is a divide here, so when I move it, it becomes a times. So that's your first step. Go back to what you're trying to make the subject, so underline that x, that's what I'm trying to get on its own, and now you go back to what we did up here. Where the 3 was attached to the x, I moved a thing that wasn't attached to it. So this is the thing I now move next. That plus 7 is going to go over, and it becomes a minus 7. So you end up having 5x is equal to bq, because none of that has moved, minus 7. Really important, be aware, because it's a plus 7 there. When I move it, it becomes a minus 7. So that's where I'm at the moment. That's what I'm trying to get on its own. And again, I need to get this 5 on its own now. So I take that over, and where it's a times by 5, it will become a divide by 5. So your final answer will become x equals bq minus 7, and then all divided by that 5 that's moved. Now, I cannot do bq divided by 5. I cannot do 7 divided by 5. Whereas up here I could actually divide 15 and 9 by 3. Can't do that here. So I leave my answer as it is in this situation. Remember, make sure you write x equals and then the actual working out there on the right hand side. Okay, hope that helps you, hope that makes sense. Anything you're not sure, maybe go back and just rewatch, because it can be quite complicated, but you can now pause the video and have a go at these ones if you want to, or I'm about to go through them anyway, so you can watch me go through them. Maybe watch me go through the first one and then see if you can get your head around answering the next lot. But as a skill, this is really good to have if you understand how to do it fully. So I forgot to mention there, if you are going to have a go at these, what it's actually asking you to do is make x the subject in each one. Okay, so that's what you're trying to make the subject. Right, let's have a little look then at this first one. So the first thing I'm trying to get on its own is this x up here, which is a little bit more complex. There's a lot more stuff that we need to unpick. So that's what I'm trying to get on its own. So I think back to what's attached to it. Well, the k is attached to it. This root sign is attached to it. So this 2p now is the easiest thing for me to move. So that's what goes over first of all. Now here, that means 2p multiplied by all of this. So when I move it over, it becomes a divide by 2p. Okay, so what I end up having is t over 2p is equal to the square root of x over k. So that's your beginning process here. The next thing to now unpick is this root sign. So you need to be confident in understanding that the opposite of root is squared. So I need to square when I take that over. So effectively I'm picking that up, taking it over there. So it becomes t over. So when I take that over, it becomes t over 2p. So the whole thing is being squared is equal to x over k. Now, really important to understand what this actually means here, because t over 2p squared means t over 2p times by t over 2p. And when you actually work that out, I'm just going to move that to the side. So when I actually work that out, t times t is t squared, and 2p times 2p is actually 4p squared. So really important here you understand that this doesn't just become t squared over 2p. T over 2p squared is this, and then therefore that's what you end up getting, because when you're multiplying fractions, you times the top by the top and the bottom by the bottom. So this actually becomes t squared over 4p squared, which is equal to x over k. And then finally, the last thing I need to do now is remove this k. It's currently a divide by k, so when I move it over, it becomes a times by k. So your final answer by making x a subject will be t squared over 4p squared times by k is equal to x. Now we can simplify that a little bit more, because that's a fraction and I'm multiplying a fraction by a whole number there in terms of k. So I put k over 1, and actually your final full answer would be kt squared. So remember, we're multiplying fractions again, so it's the top times the top and then the bottom times the bottom over 4p squared is equal to x. So you can see how that example there is a lot more complicated than the ones we've just done. And the key thing to get your head around and be aware of is this part here. Just remembering that when you are squaring a fraction, timesing it by itself, write it out twice, because it might help you to understand fully and not make any silly mistakes. So that's my final answer for that one. These questions will be more on higher, and the previous ones we've done are more your foundation level questions. Okay, so let's look at this next one. I need to get x on its own. So again, the 1 is stuck to x, the root is stuck to x. I'm going to move the 4 first of all. So hopefully you're now getting your head around the fact that becomes y over 4. So because it's a times by 4 there, it becomes a divide by 4, is equal to the square root of 1 over x. Go through the process again. I'm still trying to get this x on its own, so I'm going to move the root sign. So it becomes y over 4, and all of that is being squared to get rid of that root sign, which is 1 over x. And again, what we can do is work this out. Y over 4 squared means y over 4 times y over 4, which is y squared over 16. So this turns to y squared over 16 is equal to 1 over x. Okay, really important point again coming up here. When the thing you are trying to make the subject is the denominator of a fraction, there's a shortcut we can use. There's a shortcut where all you do is effectively reverse this one and reverse this one. So if you flip this upside down, it now becomes 16 over y squared is equal to x over 1. And now, by doing that, what I've done is I've put x at the top of this fraction here. So I put 16 at the top here. And now, because it's at the top of the fraction, it's a lot easier to work with. 1 goes over, and because it's a divide by 1 on this side, when I move it over, it becomes a times by 1. So I'm saying 16 over y squared times by 1 equals x. And the same as what I did down here when I was multiplying, I just put it as 1 over 1, top times top. So that becomes 16 over y squared is equal to x. Okay. Now this flipping process here that we're doing, so where I'm just swapping them round, is a shortcut. Okay, it's a bit of a cheat. It's a bit of a cheat, because effectively what you're actually doing, if I go through the full process, what you are actually doing is you are, to get rid of the divide by x, I'm taking it over there and it becomes y squared over 16 times by x. And that become x over 1 is equal to 1. So I end up with x y squared over 16 is equal to 1. And then I'd need to go through the process to get x on its own there again. So I'm making a lot more work for myself. I'd have to take the 16 over, and it'd be times by 16. So it becomes x y squared is equal to 16. And then at that point, I'd need to remove this y squared, where it becomes x equals 16 divided by y squared. And you can see the answer is exactly the same here and here. I'm just adding additional steps here. So if you end up having the subject at the bottom of a fraction, flip it upside down, and that effectively stops you having to do that whole process. As I say, it is a bit of a shortcut, is a bit of a cheat, but for GCSE maths, it would work. Okay. Okay, last couple then. You could pause the video again and try and do these yourself if you're feeling a bit more confident. Or here I go, going through it. So first thing this time I'm going to move is this square root. So this just becomes p squared is equal to x, y over z. Then I need to get rid of the, so I'm unpicking this now because it's a divide by z. That goes over first of all. And it now becomes a times by z. So p squared times by z is just p squared z, which is equal to xy. Or you might want to write that as zp squared, it wouldn't matter. And then to get rid of the y here, that goes over, and it becomes p squared z over y is equal to x. And that would be my final answer. So I'm just circling there all the final answers for you so you can see them all. And the final one, let's go through it again. Starting with, we're still trying to get x on its own. So the first thing that's going to go is this 3. Now, where that bracket is, that means 3 multiplied by all of that. So I'm going to divide it. So it becomes L over 3 is equal to 1 plus x all squared. So you don't actually need to then expand all that out. You don't need to put it as 2 brackets and do 1 plus x multiplied by 1 plus x and multiply it all out. Because we're going to get rid of this squared part anyway, I take that over, and the opposite of squared is square root. So key thing to remember here is that you are square rooting all of this. So it becomes the square root of L over 3, which is equal to 1 plus x. Same thing, I'm trying to get this x on its own. So now the 1 goes over. When there's not a sign in front of it here, so that effectively means plus 1. When you take that over, it becomes a minus 1. So what you're saying is the square root of L over 3 minus 1 is equal to x. Okay, and then that would be your final answer. So the minus 1 is not part of the root sign. The root sign only goes over the L minus 3 because that's what we got rid of up here, and we had to then square root this, and the 1 was not part of that square rooting process. Okay, so we've gone through the basics, the simple ones. This, as I say, would be more likely to be on foundation, or this style of question here on foundation. Just be really careful when you put your final answer. You put whatever the letter is, you make sure you write that letter equals, and whatever it is you're writing as your answer. These ones down here, much more common to be involved in a higher question, not necessarily just a question or something like that, but it could be part of a bigger question where you have to rearrange and work backwards. So definitely worth making sure that you are happy with these questions. Okay, hope you found it useful, hope it helped you, and I'll see you guys in the next video.